Hello to all my present and future social workers. My name is Adriana Pace Streeter, and in this video we're going to take a look back on the impact of American psychiatry on the LGBTQ community. As future therapists, we are committed to serve those in need and respect the inherent dignity and worth of our clients. When we diagnose our clients, we utilize a diagnostic and statistical manual. It is a helpful tool used to determine what interventions would be the most helpful for them. The purpose of this video is to show upcoming counselors and therapists the harmful past history of mental health services on the LGBTQ community in order to gain insight on some of the hesitancies and fears some of our LGBTQ clients might have when they're engaging in therapy. As social workers, we have to turn a critical eye to the DSM and analyze the role we serve as social workers in pathologizing certain behaviors. First, we need to go way back in history to U.S. colonization of Native Americans.
Discrimination of the LGBTQ community dates all the way back to when European settlers first set foot in the Americas. In an attempt to justify the genocide of Native Americans, European colonizers used religion to label them as morally perverted. These colonizers accused all Native American tribes of being sexually immoral and used sodomy as an excuse to conquer their lands. Indigenous children were forcefully removed from their families and placed into Indian boarding schools run by Christian churches on behalf of the state. These boarding schools served as locations of punishment for gender nonconformity. Gender and sexualized policing of Native Americans by European colonizers set the precedent for cultural norms and eventually criminal law. Up until 1990, the U.S. immigration laws excluded homosexuals. Sodomy laws hit the scene in the 19th century, which construed sodomy as a crime against nature. These laws were originally created with the purpose of protecting moral decency, quote unquote. In the 20th century, oral sex was added onto sodomy laws, which led to the arrest and imprisonments of violators. Homosexuals were falsely branded as child molesters and, quote, unable to control their sexual perversion, unquote. In the 20th century, religious terminology took on more scientific categories. Demonic possession transformed into insanity, drunkenness became alcoholism, and sodomy turned into homosexuality.
Now enters the world of psychology, whose pioneering figures such as Richard von Krafft-Ebing and Edmund Bergman viewed homosexuals as sick people needing medical attention. Now that we have a little bit of background on the history of the oppression and discrimination of the LGBTQ community in the United States, it's time to examine the psychiatric community's role in perpetuating this. In 1952, the DSM-1 was released, and homosexuality was upgraded from a sin to a mental health disorder. More specifically, it was placed in the category of personality disorders under the subcategory of sociopathic personality disorder. The psychiatric profession was one of the gatekeepers of society, and some thought that pathologizing homosexuality would help to abolish sodomy laws and assist in the fight to establish civil rights protections for gay people.
The preferred treatment for homosexuality disorder was aversion therapy. This involved showing male clients pictures of naked males while applying electric shocks until they threw up. Afterwards, they would either show the client pictures of naked women or make them go out on a date with one.
As you could probably guess, that method was wildly ineffective.
The DSM-2 came out in 1968 and continued to list homosexuality as a mental health disorder. But in 1973, the American Psychiatric Association took a vote, and the majority voted to remove it from the DSM. Homosexuality disorder was replaced with sexual orientation disturbance disorder in 1974. In 1980, the DSM-3 was published, and sexual orientation disturbance disorder was replaced with ego dystonic homosexuality. Clients were either categorized as ego syntonic, which meant they were not in need of treatment, or ego alien, which meant they were suffering from a mental health disorder. It was left up to the client and therapist to determine if treatment would be geared toward sexual orientation change or toward developing an ego syntonic homosexuality. The DSM-3R removed ego dystonic homosexuality altogether and left in its place sexual disorder not otherwise specified. Now we are currently on the DSM-5, and the only remnants of the previously known homosexuality disorder is gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria involves a conflict between a person's physical or assigned gender and the gender in which they identify, which causes distress and interferes with their daily functioning. Even though the current standard of psychotherapy is gay affirmative, there is still some discrepancy with gender dysphoria being a diagnosable mental health disorder.
When the Psychological Association chooses to pathologize certain behaviors, we have to critically examine if that decision is influenced by religion or politics. And we also need to determine whether that decision is going to negatively stigmatize our future clients. As a social work community, we have to always be mindful of whether we are categorizing a certain behavior or thought process as a mental disorder because it is actually causing our clients distress, or if it is solely because it deviates from the societal norm. See, there are two possible outcomes when we choose to pathologize certain behaviors. It can alleviate some of our clients' distress because they now have an explanation of why they're experiencing certain difficulties, or it can negatively stigmatize our clients and make them feel like social outcasts. As workers in the mental health profession, we have to be able to discern the difference between a pathological behavior and a non-conformant behavior. This is important because a DSM can be used in the court of law as a criminal defense. The homosexual fear defense was once used to find a heterosexual male not guilty of brutally murdering a homosexual male, with the defendant claiming that he feared for his safety. The importance of the societal and legal impacts of the DSM cannot be understated. The reality of psychiatric practice is that what is considered a mental health disorder is highly influenced by our progression in society. The concept of a mental health disorder in itself is an evolving social construct that will continue to change as society changes. Psychiatry is not an exact science. It is constantly going to evolve over time as we continue to educate ourselves on how to decolonize our practice and be less white-centered in defining our norms. As social workers, we need to be aware of the heavy influence our practice has on how we view society's minority and take an active role to ensure that our future clients feel empowered rather than feeling discriminated against. Now it's time to put our critical thinking social work caps on. How do you feel about our current approach to providing therapy to the LGBTQ community? And do you feel like gender dysphoria should be in the next DSM?